All right. Test. Can you guys hear me? Ryan, you got me back there? Can you hear me? Okay, awesome. Cool. Well, it's a little after 9:30. For those of you who are, what's that? You can't hear me? It's too quiet? If I do this, does that help? A little bit? Ryan will turn me up. I can talk louder too if that's easier. They're saying they can't hear me in the back, so.
I heard you in this section.
Oh. You who thought this new guy can't start Sunday school on time, I was operating under orders. Choir was going a little long. I was supposed to delay and wait for them to be able to come in here, so I was operating under orders there. All right. We will open with a word of prayer here, and then we will get started. God and Father, we are so grateful for the many ways that you've blessed us. You are our God, you are our Creator, you are our King, you are sovereign, and you are all-knowing. Lord, we just pray that you would be here in this building today for all that we have planned with Sunday school and church and the fellowship that we have planned. Lord, that you would be here and fill our fellowship, help us to love one another, help us to honor you. In your name, amen. So, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Tanner. I am filling in for Ryan. Ryan's been going through Wayne Grudem's book on Christian belief. We've been talking a little bit about creation recently, but he is on vacation with his wife, so I'm filling in for today. As far as the 3-month timeline goes, so I'll be subbing in for today. Next week, I don't believe there's Sunday school. We have the Chocolate Fountain Brunch. And then Ryan will wrap up in Wayne Grudem's book. And then, oh, maybe I got it wrong. One more time. Okay. Okay, so the 22nd, we have a guest speaker as well. And then, so is Ryan concluded then? For now, okay. So then Grant will pick up after that. So you learned, as I learned, what the timeline is. So before I get started, or as I get started, I'll start with kind of a cautionary tale for you all. Some practical advice to learn from my life right out the gate. So a couple weeks back, I was sitting in my chair, thinking quietly to myself about such things. And I had a thought. I said, I wonder what the prerequisites are to be able to teach Sunday school. And I should probably figure that out because maybe sometime in the distant future, I might want to teach Sunday school. So I thought, all right, I'll text Pastor Tim and figure out what the prerequisites are to teach Sunday school. So I sent a very, exactly the way I just detailed it to you. Hey Tim, sometime in the distant future, I might want to teach Sunday school. What should I be doing now to prepare myself? The prerequisites, which boxes do I need to check to be able to teach Sunday school? To which he immediately texted me back, said, oh, you want to teach Sunday school? I will get you on the roster right now. I'll text Grant, and we'll get you in the lineup. So my response, what I wanted to respond was, no. You misunderstood what I just said. But I live in Minnesota, so I can't just say, no, you misunderstood what I just said. I have to make it this big, long text that explains what I was saying. And before I could send that big, long text and complete it, I got another text from Tim in a group chat with me and Grant that said, hey, Grant, Tanner wants to be on the Sunday school roster. Let's get him on the roster. And before I could copy and paste what I had written into that text, Grant had said, great, we got him on the roster, no worries. Just a cautionary tale for you all, if you just are looking for information on the prerequisites to teach Sunday school, I walked that path, and that path leads you to so I don't know what the right path is to get the prerequisites, but it's not that one. You have to be able to breathe. Those are the prerequisites that I'm being told now. So just a story from my life there. Then the question was, what do I want to talk about today? Because I only have the 1 week to sub today, so I didn't want to get into a book and then wait 4 or 5 months to get into the rest of that book and forget what we talked about, 4 months prior. And at the same time, Tim had been asking me over and over again to kind of report back to you guys how things have been going with seminary in a Sunday evening service. So I thought, well, hey, let's just do the Sunday school lesson that we have. I will kind of report back to you guys kind of how things have been going with seminary the last couple of months, and just kind of show you what's been going on there. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I've been getting a lot of questions from people about seminary, and I can kind of sort them into two overarching questions. The first one is, how has it been going? How has seminary been going? And in that question, people are wondering things like, what does it look like? And what do the classes look like? And what does it feel like? And how does it fit into your everyday life? And then the second question is just, what have you been learning about? What are the classes? What's in the classes? And what does that look like? So those are the two things I want to talk about. The first one isn't going to take super long. And my hope is for anybody who has just been curious that it will kind of fill them in on what it looks like. And then for anybody who's kind of been on the fence, been thinking about seminary, maybe this would be a great time for them to ask some questions, see if I can't answer them. So does that sound fair? Like a decent outline for? Cool. Sounds good. So as far as how it's been going, I started classes for seminary to set the table a little bit. A year or so ago, the church started to identify a need for more men to be able to teach. They want to grow the church and just the members of the church. And so one of the ways that they wanted to support that was by offering for men in the church to be able to go to seminary, to gain some tools, to gain some knowledge, to be able to bring back and help feed the church here through Sunday school or through Sunday evening lessons, those kinds of things. And it was something me and my wife had considered prior to that offer anyway. We had considered seminary, months and years ago. Figured it probably wasn't the right time of life with 4 little kids under the age of 12. So we kind of, left that thought behind us. But when the church identified a need and we want to try to help support the church how we can, we thought more about it, we prayed more about it, figured we'd give it a shot. Again, just very leery about the time commitment, how much it would take away from other priorities that we have going on. But last summer, I actually started the first class last summer with a class in Romans. And for those of you who have done any kind of college in the past, when you're signing up for classes, it was quite an experience to sign up for a class that's just called Romans, just called a Bible. And it was kind of exciting to say, hey, this is exactly what we're going to be learning about, something that I think is very relevant. So I was very excited for that class. And what that class looked like, there's 2 kinds of classes. Anyone who's done college in the past, there's a whole semester class, or I guess spring semester or fall semester class, where you're meeting 1, 2, 3 hours a week for those classes. That is not what the summer class was. The summer class was 1 week. Lecture was 5 hours. It was 1 week, Monday through Friday, so Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and it was five hours each day. Just slammed all that material into that 1 week of lecture. So just very, very quick as far as lecture is concerned. But then you had a 3-month window to complete all of the coursework, right? So all of the reading. You had that 3-month window, and that's kind of what the summer class looked like with a gentleman called Ardel Canaday, who is a person who is fluent in Greek and translated the book of Romans himself from Greek into the Ardel Canaday version of Greek, and kind of took us through all of that. This fall, me and then 2 others in the church here went through systematic theology with Dr. Bowder, which again looked a little bit more like a common college course where it was over a 3-4 month period. We met once a week, Thursday nights. It was a 3-hour class period, just once a week. But then you had all of the reading and assignments and things of that nature spread out throughout. There were two exams as well. So I set the table there to kind of tell you a little bit about how it kind of fits into my life, right? So I work full-time. I have 4 little girls at home. I'm a basketball coach and a volleyball coach and all these other extracurriculars. And I remember talking to one of the other gentlemen who started seminary this fall, who said, man, I really thought it would fit better into my current setup. Like, I would put the kids to bed, and then I would get everything I need to get done for seminary, and it would just fit very well into my life without having to move pieces around. And that was not the case that he found, and it's also not the case that I found. So it's been a huge blessing to sit in these lectures and learn from these very educated gentlemen. But it also is very much a time commitment and very much it's not something that clicks into life in that way. You have to be moving things around and making sacrifices to go through these classes. Because I just started the next class as well this last week, and when you march out the schedule, there's something due every single week. Every single Friday, something new is due, and it's read this 400-page book and then write a review on that 400-page book every single week. Or an exam is due, or a bigger paper is due. So it is quite, it's a lot of work. I'm very much enjoying the lectures. I know there's an option to audit classes. I don't know the specifics on that. And I know that because at the beginning of every class period, or every class that I've done, they do introductions, and you get to know all of your classmates, and you're being introduced to everybody. And what's cool about that is you're finding out where everybody's from, and maybe a quarter of the people are Minnesota, and then there's all these other states that are represented, and then there's all these other countries represented in this classroom. And the way the classrooms look is you can go up to Minneapolis, where the seminary is, and sit in class with the professor there. Or like most people do, because they're in other states and other countries, you can meet at a specific time on Zoom and do the class period over Zoom from your basement. So it's very convenient in that way. But I know when we're introducing some of those students, there are people who introduce themselves and they were just auditing the class. Now I think in most of the instances it was the spouses, and I know the spouses can audit the class, no question. I don't know if just anybody off the street could audit the classes, but the reason I bring that up is because you would be able to enjoy the lectures and get the learning and teaching from the professor without maybe having to do all of the the reading and writing and coursework that ends in a degree, that kind of a thing. So yeah, I knew this first part was just going to be me talking for 5-7 minutes about kind of what it looked like, and my hope was actually to just give people 30 seconds, a minute, however long they need. If anybody had any questions, to see if I could answer them for you. Like I said, for anybody who has just been wondering what it looks like, or somebody who's been sitting on the fence. So I just want to give a couple moments here for anybody who has questions. Jason's got the mic. Go ahead and raise your hand if you have any. If you don't, no worries. We'll move on to the next bit. I've been told I have to count to 7 in my head to give people adequate time to raise their hand, because we're... Eric here.
Well, since you brought it up, when we started with the seminary, remember when we enrolled, they asked the spouses to actually also give their testimony and also an opinion on what they thought about this plan. And so Kim did that for me, obviously. I have to say that, and she's not here, she's teaching Sunday school. So. Oh, where? Oh, yeah, right, she's teaching Sunday school. But I'll just share that I think that she would have second thoughts now before agreeing to that.
Sure.
Because of what you've been saying. It's just been a lot of work.
It's a lot.
And it's partly because also my personality, I get anxious about the assignments and things like that. And you know what I mean? And she just feels, I think that she feels there's definitely been less attention paid to her during this time.
Yeah.
And that's been hard for her.
Yeah.
So.
I really appreciate you sharing that. I know that's not probably an easy thing to share, but it's just the truth. And the pastor came to me after my class in Romans, in the summer, hey, you want to report back to the church? And I was like, what are you wanting me to report back to the church? Because this was a lot of stress.
Right.
So
I don't say that because I think that it was necessarily the wrong thing to do, but I think that I need to manage my time in a different way.
Yeah.
So that, I mean, if this is what God wants me to do, right, us to do, then he's got to speak into both of our hearts about this being worth it and there being a goal, that, you know, and also I think I can do better at prioritizing her and,
yeah, it's tough.
yeah.
There are other priorities that we have.
Right.
So where's the time going to come from? And
Right.
it has to come from, because some of the books are, I mean, there's a 1,000-page book I had to read.
Right.
Time's got to come from somewhere.
And
so.
I'm not a fast reader,
Right.
and that's part of the problem, you know, so,
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. Any other questions at all?
I was going to ask
Sure.
Carolyn on the spot, but it's funny that Eric said that because I was actually going to ask, how's that play your commitment? How does that play into your marriage, into your family life and everything?
Yeah.
He kind of touched on that.
He did that well. Essentially, you know, the little bit that I would say is you find ways to sneak in times to get the assignments done. So, you know, I usually drive everywhere, but if we have a 2-hour drive somewhere, I will let her drive, and then, you know, I'm reading a book. Or, you know, she's putting the kids to bed, and you quick say, I love you, and then, you know, you're reading, like, those kinds of things. Or, you know, if I'm being completely honest, you know, I'm a gym goer. I love to go to the gym, and some of those things have slipped, right? Like, I haven't been going to the gym as much and things of that nature, just because you have stuff to do and got to get it done, so. Any other questions in general about, right here?
What were maybe just a few of your key takeaways studying Romans?
Studying Romans? Yeah, great question. Romans, probably my favorite exercise I learned from that class is we were required to take 3 different translations of Romans. So one of them had to be ESV, one of them had to be his translation that he did, and then you could pick any other translation. And you were required to read that whole book in one sitting, which I've never done before, right? You might read through a book in a certain amount of time, but to sit through it in one sitting. And to read through Romans, just so you guys know, it takes roughly 48 minutes if you if you read it all in one sitting at my reading speed. But what was interesting about that is when you read it through that way, you see more of the forest and less of the trees. We spend so much time focusing on the trees, and what I mean by that is we get into this little chunk of verses, these 5-6 verses, and what does it mean, and how does it relate to the surrounding passages, and that's all good. I think that's good. But we lose the forest, which is to say, Paul was writing this to someone with a plan, and when you read through it very quickly, right, without stopping to look at all the trees, you kind of see where he was going, what he wanted out of the Romans there. And then I guess the second bit, you said 1 or 2 key takeaways, so here's the second one is his translation is very unique in its approach. There's a couple key verses that he translates differently, and it changes the way that you understand the whole book. And so I actually still have that copy PDF of Romans in my Bible because it's something I want to continue to wrestle with as far as those couple key verses and which way Paul was taking them. So, one up here, Jason. John, in Rome specifically, I was asking, is there anything that jumped out that surprised me? I guess I'll kind of just kind of reiterate the last thing that I said. You know, you got these key couple of verses that he's talking about, and I don't want to. It would be a deep dive if I did that, and I don't want to get into that today. But we could talk more. I could, if I taught Sunday school again, I could talk about those couple verses that I had never heard that perspective before, again, when you read it that way, it kind of changes the way you see 2, 3, 4 chapters in a row. what Paul was getting at there. And it really focuses back on Jesus instead of focusing on us. So it's something I want to wrestle with because it's appealing out the gate. Whether or not it's true, that's what I need to wrestle with. But yeah, good question. Yeah. Any other questions before we move on? Awesome. So that was kind of just this is what seminary looks like. Anyone can find me if they want to and ask me more questions, but I'm going to move on to what have we been learning? So that was the second question, or the second arc of questions. What have you been learning about? And so I could have gone and talked about Romans a little bit, but because the most recent class was systematic theology, I figured I'd go there. And this worked for like a half hour while I was eating. And now that I need it, it's choosing to not. We'll see if it fires up here. Yes, everybody fights with the projector. I think it's coming on here. I just fell asleep while it was waiting for me. Thank you. Thinking about it. It's thinking about it. Okay. It should get brighter as we go here. So, all right, so what have we been learning about? Hello. So the class that me and the other two took this semester was systematic theology, which is just a way to say there are various systems in place about thinking about the topics of the Bible. And how do we click them into a place and create a system out of them? And that class is split into, or that topic, I guess, is split into 4 different classes, 4 different semesters: Systematic Theology 1, Systematic Theology 2, 3, and 4. And that's kind of, I don't know if you can see my mouse kind of dancing over here. So these are the 4 different semesters, right? Semester 1 will cover these kind of issues, Semester 2 will cover these kind of issues, Semester 3 will cover these kinds of issues, Semester 4 will cover these kinds of issues. And I put all the big words up here because that's what they're called, but these are all the studies of something. And this semester, me and Eric and Ben went through Systematic Theology 4, which covered eschatology and ecclesiology. So those are the big words. The smaller words, so ecclesiology is just the study of the church. How did it start? What is its purpose? What is its origins? Where is it going? What is it used for? And then eschatology is the study of last things. So those are the 2 broad topics that we talked about. And so what I want to do is I just want to give you like a 30,000-foot view flyover of what we studied in eschatology. My hope is to not get too caught in the weeds and to just go with that 30,000-foot view. So the first thing to know is just what is eschatology. We already talked about it. It's the study of last things. The etymology, or the breakdown of the words, is in Greek. Eschatos means last, and then in Greek, logi means the study of. So eschatology being the study of last things. And immediately it can be divided into 2 kind of big topics. One is personal eschatology, and one is general eschatology. So my hope with this tool that I'm using Prezi as my presentation platform. My hope is to show you kind of what I was hoping for myself even, is to be able to take this jumble of words and this jumble of thoughts and this jumble of topics that all get muddled together and hopefully start to kind of put them in little bubbles that kind of help me sort it all out. And it's helped me sort it all out. I'm kind of hoping it'll help you sort it all out as well as we kind of fly over it real quick. But personal eschatology is what happens to individuals at the end of the age, right? So if you had like a cameraman standing behind me trying to film and video what happens to Tanner at the last times, right? That would be personal eschatology. But if that cameraman zoomed way out and instead stared at the world and said what happens to the world and everything as a whole, that would be general eschatology. So those are the 2 broad categories that we talked about this semester. When we talk personal eschatology, it's immediately broken up in my head into 2 different sections, right? You have what is personal eschatology for the believer and what is personal eschatology for the unbeliever, because obviously those things would be different. When we talk about, what can they expect for the believer, there are a couple different topics that we touched on this semester. One of them is just talking about our bodies. So right now we have our current worldly bodies, and some of you may be familiar with the concept of a glorified eternal body, right? But if any of us passes now, and it's still not the end times, when we get our glorified eternal bodies, what does that intermediate body look like? Do we have a body? So we talked about those kinds of issues. Another topic that is similar is the intermediate state, right? So we have what we have in our bodies right now, what life looks like. The Bible talks a lot about what life will look like in the eternal state, but if we were to pass today and it's not the eternal state, what does that intermediate state look like? So we talked a little bit about that. We talked about what a believer can expect from heaven or about heaven. And then we also talked about judgment. So there is a judgment for believers at the end times. And so we talked about that as well. On the flip side, when you're talking about for unbelievers, it's pretty much the same. What is the body? What can the unbeliever expect for a body? What can they expect in the intermediate states prior to eternal judgment? What does the judgment look like? And then Eric spoke a couple Sunday evenings ago, about some different views of hell. So I'll leave that one alone here. If at any point people have questions, you can stop me. Again, I'm hoping to not get too in the weeds as we just kind of fly over everything, but if you have questions, just let me know. We're going to come back to this one. So after the 30,000-foot view, I think I'm going to have a little bit of time to kind of take down one level and just kind of show you a way that seminary has helped me kind of put these things in their places. And that might be what I come back to if I have time in these places here. So that's, is that all I had for personal? I think that's all I had. Yeah, so that's personal eschatology. I really wish that would go away. General eschatology, on the flip side, looks like topics like this. So we talked a little bit about protology, so pro being before, right? So the study of the before things. And essentially, Dr. Kevin Bowder is the professor that we had, makes the assertion that what we believe about our protology, or what God was doing in the beginning, is going to affect the way we think about our eschatology, or the things that we think about at the end. Essentially, God had a plan here in the beginning, and that plan, was interrupted by sin, but God is essentially trying to get back to what he was beginning with. And so that's this idea of protology. We talked a little bit about the millennium. So some of you might be familiar with some of these terms, right? So we have amillennialism, postmillennialism, and premillennialism. So when we think about the end times, the way that our church believes is that we have the rapture, and then we have the tribulation, and then after the tribulation is the millennium, which is a 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth. But that millennium can be thought of in these three different ways: amillennialism, postmillennialism, premillennialism. Again, not going to get thick into the weeds of these today, just kind of telling you this is the things we flew by over 3 to 4 month period. We talked a little bit about the different covenants mentioned in the Bible. So you have the Abrahamic covenant, the Mosaic covenant, the Davidic covenant, the New covenant, and how do those things play into the story of eschatology in the end times. We talked about the rapture and how the Bible doesn't actually have the word rapture in it. The concept of the rapture is one that we've kind of had to build to understand. We talked about the 5 different ways that people view the rapture. This would be those words that you might have heard, like pre-tribulationism, post-tribulationalism. And then the 2 that I was less familiar with was this pre-wrath, or the 3/4 view of the rapture, and then the preterist view, which is that the rapture has already happened, or there is no rapture that we're looking forward to anyway. And then we spent a little bit of time talking about, I would really love to get into this passage someday in Matthew. I don't know that I'll have time for it today, but how that plays into our thoughts on the rapture. We talked about Daniel's prophecies, 3 or 4 different prophecies and how they relate to eschatology. I actually missed that lecture. I was down in Tennessee that week, so I really wish I hadn't missed that lecture. You can't record the lectures. He doesn't record the lectures. The way you get that material is by reading your friends' class notes, which is great, but it's also not hearing that lecture for yourself. So I really wish I didn't have to miss that one. But so I don't. Go ahead. With the rapture? Yeah. So. Yeah, no worries. So the Olivet Discourse is. And I have it open here in my Bible too. I'd love to get to it, but passages in the Synoptic Gospels, so Matthew, Mark, and Luke, where Jesus is trying to teach his disciples something. And the way I've always heard that is that the something he's trying to teach them about is the rapture. But the way that Dr. Bowder presents it is actually it has nothing to do with the rapture. It's actually talking a little bit about the regathering of Israel at the end times. And then it's also talking about the millennium. So, does that answer your question? Okay, cool. All right. So we talked a little bit about Daniel's prophecies. We talked about the different judgments, which I know I put in the personal eschatology because you could see the cameraman behind an individual. But there are also judgments for the nations. And then, what did I do? Oh, something about Trump. All right. But there are also judgments that apply to nations, and then just the judgments in general, what does that look like? So I put it here in general eschatology as well, and then we talked about the tribulation. So how's that for a flyby on 4 months of eschatology, yeah? Any questions on just that summary of sorts before I get into... I'm going to slowly go down into the weeds, right? We're up here, the 30,000-foot view. We'll take a step down, and if we have time, we'll get thick into the weeds.
I just got a question, how they, if in the classes in seminary, for example, like eschatology, and then you learn about the different viewpoints, is there a criteria of, like, say, how long these viewpoints have been around, or to even put them on there to learn about different viewpoints? Do you know what I'm getting at?
Yeah, I understand your question. You're essentially saying, like, is there a prerequisite of sorts on a time? Like, so if I came up with a new idea today, it would be excluded from what he's going to talk about because it hasn't been around long enough. And I think the answer to that is no. I think what he's doing, though, is he's taking either the ones that have the most credibility, or he's taking the ones that have the most pervasiveness in the culture, the things that people are talking about now, and how does that actually stack up against what Scripture says. So I don't think it's a time prerequisite so much as those other things. Any other questions about this flyby of eschatology? Cool. So what I want to do then, this will probably take the rest of our time, and I won't be able to get into Matthew, which is fine, but I just want to show you how seminary has really helped me with these. This is an example of something that seminary has taken, this crooked pipe, and helped me kind of straighten it out a little bit and understand for myself what these places are. So these are places that are mentioned in the Bible. And prior to seminary, if I had seen these places kind of all shook up and jumbled in a bag, and you pull one out and you said, oh, hey, Tanner, what is Sheol? Right, I might be able to make something up, right? And then if you reach in that bag again and you go, what is hell? And you're like, God, I thought they were kind of the same thing, right? or there's overlap, right? And then you pull out the next one, it says, what's the abyss? And you're like, I give up on this game. I don't know what all of these things are, right? So post-seminary, it's really given me some tools to help put these things in the bubbles, like I said, which is why I built this way, because they're little bubbles to look at. So I just kind of want to dive into these real quick, just to see if I can help straighten them out for you, and then you can kind of see a little bit what we went through in seminary here. So the first one, as far as places are concerned that we're talking about in the Bible, we're talking about Sheol and or Hades. We talked about heaven, we talked about hell and Gehenna, we talked about the abyss, and we talked about the grave. And what are they and what are the differences? So when we talk about Sheol and or Hades, I know it's small, I'll get it zoomed in. But what I want to say first is an exercise that I've really appreciated going through these topics is because you have all these different topics, and this guy has that opinion, and this guy has that opinion, and they interpret it this way. But I really love starting with what do we know, right? Because there are things that we can know about these topics, right? And there are things we can speculate about these topics, and there are things that we can infer from other passages about these topics. But why not start with what we know about these topics, right? And then we can get into some of the other things later. So starting with what we know, Sheol and Hades is the same thing. It's pointing at the same place or pointing at the same object. It's just two different times, right? So you have the Old Testament when things were written in Hebrew, and the Hebrew word is Sheol. And then you have the New Testament when things were written in Greek, and they use the word Hades. Okay? So we know that Sheol and Hades refers to the same thing, which is why they don't get two separate bubbles. It's the same bubble. It is not equivalent to the grave if what you're thinking about as the grave is where we bury people, right? The dirt that we put people in, right? Like that's in our culture, that's what the grave, or at least for me, that's what the grave means. And that is not what Sheol is. Sheol, or the grave, is where the bodies are buried. Sheol or Hades is where, again, if that cameraman was following you, right, it's where you go after you've died. It's a place, right? It is not equivalent to hell. The Greek word for hell is Gehenna, or the word that Jesus, the word picture that Jesus used is Gehenna. We'll get into that a little bit later when we talk about hell and Gehennas. But the point here is Sheol and Hades is not hell. One of the things that we know, again, these are things that we know, is that both the saved and the unsaved go to Sheol. Which again, if you're hitting me with a multiple choice quiz prior to seminary, nope, the believers don't go to Sheol. But you have passages like Genesis 37:35, which says, so we're talking in the time of Jacob and Joseph, and it says all his sons, so we're talking about Jacob. This is just after Joseph's brothers threw him in the pit and then sold him to slavery, and said that he died, and brought that news back to Jacob, and Jacob is mourning, and he says, all of his sons and his daughters, Jacob's sons and daughters, rose up to comfort him, Jacob, but he, Jacob, refused to be comforted and said, no, I shall go down to Sheol to my son, Joseph, mourning, so upset. So here in Genesis, we see that Jacob not only expected that Joseph was in Sheol, right? Or Jacob saying, I'm going to go to Sheol, and I'm going to meet him there. So he was expecting that both of those people would be in Sheol. And then there's another instance, I'll pass by it for time, but in Isaiah, where I believe it's Josiah, King Josiah is talking about going to the gates of Sheol. So the last thing is that Hades, or Sheol or Hades, is not the eternal state. So when we bounce over to Revelation 20, I'll just turn there myself here. Revelation 20, 13 through 15. What that says is, and the sea gave up the dead who were in it. Death and Hades gave up the dead who were in them, and they were judged, each one of them, according to what they had done. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. So this is a pretty vivid picture that these are two separate places because one of them is going to be thrown into the other of them. So the point here being Sheol and Hades, not the same as the eternal state or hell itself. So these are things that we can know about Sheol. If you want to turn somewhere today, turn to Luke 16. This is one of the passages that talks the most about Sheol. This is one of those passages that, again, prior to this class, I would have been very confused about. It's about the rich man and Lazarus. And I would have said that this has to do with the rich man and Lazarus is an interaction in hell, right? And when it says Sheol here, it just must mean hell. That's what my head would have said prior to this. But again, this is an exercise of like, what things can we know about Sheol, right? So I'm just going to read through the passage. Fun fact, for those who didn't know, the rich man is commonly referred to as Dives, D-I-E-V-S. because that is the Latin word for a rich man. And I just think Dives is a way more fun way to say, to pronounce this man versus just saying a rich man over and over again. It's more fun to refer to him as that way, ask Dives, right? He said, neither will they be convinced if someone should rise from the dead. So I know I'm running short on time, so I'm just going to kind of fast forward or play this on 2x speed here. So the exercise that I really enjoyed learning about is what can we know about Sheol? These are things that we know about Sheol from this passage. We know that there is a personal, conscious existence. So after death, these people still exist. We know there is a continuity of identity. So when you look at verse 25, Abraham is saying, you received good things in your life on earth, and their identity continues. We know that these people are aware of each other. Right? They're talking to each other, so they are aware of each other. We know that discourse is possible because they're talking to each other. We know there. We know souls have body-like capacities. So there's talk of how finger into some water and then touch his tongue. The individuals recognize each other even though they didn't exist with each other. Right? Lazarus and Dives is here. Abraham recognizes and Dives recognize. And then one speaking with or identifying. And then time here, so just the last 2 slides here. When you talk about this passage, there are people who believe that it's factual. This is an actual event that happened between Lazarus and Dives and Abraham. And there's people who believe that it's parable. In favor of people who think that it's a parable, when you look at Luke, the beginning of Luke 16 and then a bunch of 15, it's all parables that Jesus is telling. And so it kind of fits into this chunk of a bunch of parables that are being taught. And so that's kind of in favor of it being a parable. In favor of it being fact is in all of the other parables, nobody's ever named specifically. And in this parable, or whatever you want to call it, Abraham is identified, Lazarus is identified, and that doesn't happen in the other parables. But at the very least, what's most important is this isn't fable. So fable is different than parable. Fable is something fantastical happening, like animals talking, or in Judges 9, they're trying to identify a king, and they talk to trees and different herbs and brushes and bramble bushes and such. And those things talk, and that is a fable, and this is not a fable. So Jesus isn't making these things up. So I didn't get quite as far into these bubbles as I wanted to, but hopefully you can kind of there where this is one of the things that I've learned from seminary that has been very useful, is to help kind of sort all of these topics out in my head. If I get another chance to sub, we can pick this back up. I can also pop into my one in Romans, and we could talk that too. Any final questions here? And I won't count to 7. Yeah.
Well, so the one that came to mind as you're talking about that is how does this concept of Sheol square with to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord? Is the Lord present in Sheol, or any thoughts on
Fantastic question, and I actually would have covered that if I got into the next bubble of heaven, which is to say there's 2 theories of Sheol. I'm just going to bounce through it super fast. There's 2 theories of Sheol. There's this 2-compartment theory, where it's a place that has 2 compartments, right? There's torment and paradise. And then there's another that's just called the realm of the dead theory, which is to just say when you die, you enter this ethereal world that exists, and we call that Sheol. In the 2-compartment theory, Sheol was a place, like a long, nice hotel that you stayed in. And when Jesus died, he actually went to Sheol and brought people who were in Sheol up to heaven. So the people who believe with the 2-compartment theory, Sheol is now in paradise is now in heaven. The people who believe the realm of the dead theory always thought that paradise was in heaven. So I think it kind of reconciles when you start to get into that heaven bubble there. So. All right.
Thank you for volunteering to teach.
My pleasure. My pleasure. We are out of time. So you are all dismissed.